And it's this: more South Africans who have been evacuated from Sudan are expected to arrive back home this morning. International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor is expected to be at the Tambo International Airport. Now, the first batch of 10 South Africans rescued from Sudan arrived at the airport last night. This update now from news reporter Khayelihle Khumalo joins us now from the Tambo International Airport, monitoring their arrivals. Khaya, thank you so much for your time this morning. So let's start here. How many South Africans are expected to arrive today, and at what time?
Well, absolutely, Mxolisi. So everyone is waiting with bated breath for the arrival of South Africans. So today we do expect a very significant number of them to come through. Obviously, they really had to endure quite a lot having left Sudan. And of course, quite a number of stakeholders were on the ground, and the Department of International Relations and Cooperation has been at the forefront to make sure that the process really just became as seamless as possible. But also they had to work with their counterparts as well, mainly Saudi Arabia and of course Egypt. But joining us now is the department's spokesperson, Mr. Munyela. So sir, thank you so much indeed. I would imagine it's a day of culmination after all those concerted efforts that you have put to make sure that the South Africans and those citizens from the neighboring country to make their way finally home.
Mr. Top Diplomat, who is practicing diplomacy from the Auckland Park. It's good to see you, Your Excellency.
All right.
No, indeed. This was not an easy operation. As you can imagine, there is intense fighting in Khartoum at the time when we moved our people out. We're happy there's been a lull in the fighting now. We've been calling for this ceasefire to allow for humanitarian aid and for those who are injured to be attended to. And of course, the bigger message for us is a call for negotiations, for peace to be given a chance. And the IGAD, the regional body, is ready to mediate, supported by all of us. But in terms of the evacuation of South Africans, so the group that's arriving today would be the group that we moved out of Khartoum with buses, 2 buses paid for by government. There was a 3rd bus the next day, paid for by gift of the givers. We moved them through the Aswan border with Egypt. In fact, some of them had left their travel documents because they left in a hurry, as you can imagine. Had to go through several checkpoints manned by the 2 warring factions. When we got to the border, so we had to negotiate, and this is where we appreciate the support of countries like Egypt, because eventually we managed to get everybody across the border, put them in hotels just to rest a bit. And you saw the picture I put on social media yesterday. The South African National Defence Force Special Forces were on the ground with our people to make sure that nothing goes wrong. And this is why we are able to report today that all South Africans that we know of are accounted for and safely out of Sudan. There's a group that arrived yesterday. So this would be the group that was in Port Sudan, who managed to cross into Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. When they got there, our Consul General and his team were on the ground to receive them and provide support, and they arrived yesterday. Their employer actually paid for those flight tickets. So we appreciate the support of countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Sudan itself, the incredible support of Gift of the Givers. Our people are safe and they are arriving home, and we are grateful.
And just the complexities. I mean, it's a very fluid situation, highly volatile, to make sure that South Africans, but also you had a very broad strategy where you were just not purely focusing on South Africans or your diplomatic staff, but tell us about this broad strategy where you also assisted other nationals.
So unlike other countries, when the intense fighting was going on, who moved in and extracted or evacuated only diplomats, as in staff at their embassies, South Africa took a conscious decision that our diplomats will remain on the ground and make sure that our nationals are taken care of. And when we do evacuate, we move everybody out, not just the diplomats. And we've been able to successfully do that. What we also did was, because we had received requests from several countries in our region, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, we actually also assisted Angolans, and there was an initial request from Namibians as well. We're able to assist other nationals from our region because these are partners of ours, these are fellow Africans, and so we're happy that we're able to do that in the spirit of Pan-Africanism that we are known for, Ubuntu. We always say that Africa is the centerpiece of our foreign policy. Here's the thing, with the situation in Sudan, which is absolutely devastating. If you look at the number of civilians that have been killed, our message as South Africa, and it's as a principle we hold dearly, is that political problems that lead to conflicts like this are best resolved through dialogue, and this is why we're calling for negotiations.
And of course, South Africa has been calling for the cessation of hostilities. What do you make of the interventions? We saw a statement from South Sudan President Salva Kiir Mayardit saying that he has been interacting with the two generals, saying that they should support the ceasefire, but also in the main make sure that the humanitarian access is able to go through, especially with the very worrisome reports that, you know, the healthcare system is on the verge of collapse, the food shortages. What is Pretoria's stance on all these overtures by the regional players?
It's extremely worrying. You know that the African Union has this goal of silencing the guns on the African continent. In fact, when President Ramaphosa chaired the AU, this was one of the central themes that we were pushing as a country. So that remains the goal for us as Africans, that we have to arrive at a point where when there are issues, when there are problems, political in nature, we have to pursue the route of diplomacy, of negotiations, peaceful ways of resolving conflicts, and not this fighting. Fighting only results in the destruction of infrastructure and properties and killing of people. It's not what we want to see. And Sudan in particular has been unstable for a while, if you look at the number of coup d'etats that have happened there. So this remains our call, a cessation of hostilities, for peace, for negotiations, which can be mediated so that we resolve whatever issues are at play. And South Africa stands ready to play its role.
All right, Mr. Munyela, thank you so much indeed for your time. So, of course, we see that's the Department of International Relations and Cooperation spokesperson, an incredibly untenable situation in Sudan. And we do know this is quite a very important country. And the region where it's geographically located, it's not far from the Sahel region, it's not far from the Horn of Africa, and very close as well to so many countries that are very much unstable. The current situation in Libya, in Central African Republic, in Chad as well, where we've seen cases of violent extremism. So there is a great deal of worry if this conflict in Sudan continues with the ramifications for the region, but also not for the region, for the continent of Africa, where oftentimes the issue of instability is always a main defining factor. In fact, during the course of this week in policy, the Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo was in South Africa, and one of the main issues that he raised was that Africa needs to shed this image of instability. If you want to see development, if you want to see transformation in so many aspects, the issue of peace and security should be prioritized. So we're still keenly waiting for the South Africans. We believe the flight slightly delayed. So they were supposed to land here at about 10:55. So now we do understand they'll be using the Kenyan Airways aircraft. They should be here at Tambo around 11:15. So they'll be using Terminal A as they arrive here at home.
Right, Kaya, do we know now what time the minister is expected to arrive?
Well, at this point in time, Khayelihle, we're still waiting for the confirmation, but she's going to be a very central player in terms of welcoming these South Africans, especially because the department really has been working so hard in terms of making sure that the evacuation is successful, especially because it's been a very precarious situation on the ground. It's very unstable, it's very quite volatile, with a lot of uncertainties, especially because they had to deal with a lot of bottlenecks by the borders in Egypt, Saudi Arabia as well, and many other parts of Sudan, where South Africans at least have been evacuated to. But we got an opportunity to speak to some evacuees here at the airport yesterday, so the very first batch of South Africans. So they were talking about a very harrowing experience that they had to endure, where they had the bombs going off and all kinds of explosions. So a lot of them really were distraught and intimidated by what happened. But some are still hell-bent to go back to Sudan as soon as stability has been restored. So we'll keenly stay here at the airport. As soon as they do arrive, we'll make sure that we give you the latest.
And I know you're also making mention of the evacuees, and I'm sure this whole situation must have also taken its toll on some of the family members who are waiting in anticipation there. Have you had some conversations with them? What are they saying? I'm sure it's just mixed emotions.
Well, absolutely. A very worrisome situation, Mkolisi, because a lot of the families, they were waiting to hear from their loved ones. For some time now, Sudan has been experiencing the internet blackout, so there were those concerns as well in terms of the lack of interaction because of this blackout. But they really made means of really just staying in touch with their families, especially when the fighting was intensifying. There was this trepidation for the families who were waiting, and of course a lot of them, they were appealing to the stakeholders, to the South African government, to the Sudanese authorities, to the Saudis as well, because 10 of them who arrived here yesterday at the airport. They used the route via Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, using of course the Red Sea. They had to be taken into a warship, and they were able to, from Jeddah, then move to Dubai, and then they were able to fly back here at home. So there was a sigh of relief as they landed here in South Africa. A lot of them really talk about their experiences, saying it was an incredibly tough time being stuck in the conflict-ridden country, but really just from their just part as well, appealing for calm to be restored, because the big question is, what about the Sudanese themselves? Especially because we do know that quite a number of foreign diplomatic missions that are accredited in Khartoum, some of the Sudanese nationals, they have their passports stuck in those embassies. So there was quite a great deal of concern as to what's going to happen. But thankfully for 77 South Africans who were in Sudan, they have been safely evacuated. There were some challenges because, obviously when you deal with the borders, it's different jurisdictions and so many rules and regulations. But South African diplomats were very much effective in terms of making sure that whoever was stuck at the border was assisted. At least that's the confirmation we do have at this point.
All right, Khayelihle Khumalo working that story for us live at the Tambo International Airport. We will no doubt be touching base with you a bit later on in the program. It's time for us to now take a quick break. We're back with more news as well as live updates. This is The Agenda.